In this Bible book summary video, I'm going to provide you a brief summary of the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis has 50 chapters. It's a large book. But if we're going to get our heads around this book, we need to understand the nature of the book and then briefly the structure of the book. The book of Genesis comes from a Greek word that simply means origins or beginnings. And that's exactly what this book is all about. It is a book of beginnings. It has the very first marriage. It has the very first family, the very first sin, the very first worship service, the very first gospel promise, the very first nations, and the list goes on. It is a book of beginnings. But there is something in the book that does not have a beginning. We read in the very first verse, Genesis 1 and verse 1, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." God is the one who does not have a beginning. He is the reason why everything begins. He is the creator and maker of all. He is to be worshipped and to be adored. Now, if we're going to work our way through the book of Genesis and not get lost in any of the details, a helpful way of summarizing the book is to simply break the 50 chapters into two major sections. First of all, we have chapters 1 through to 11, and then chapters 12 to 50. We can call that first section, Genesis 1 to 11, Primeval History, and then chapters 12 to 50, Patriarchal History. So let's begin with that first section, Primeval History. Genesis 1 to 11 is surrounded by four significant events. We learn first of all in Genesis 1 and 2 about the creation. God speaks and creates this world in 6 systematic ways. He forms and fills, and we see the amazing power of God in simply speaking and all things coming into existence. When we learn about creation, the high point of creation is what takes place on day number 6, and that is the creation of man. This is the high point because Scripture says that God made man in his image. This tells us immediately that there is something special about humanity. There is a dignity and a value, but also a very special plan that God is going to unfold when it comes to him and his relation to humanity. So the first major event in this section is the creation, Genesis 1 and 2. Then we see in Genesis 3, the fall. This refers to what happens when Adam and Eve, the first human beings, rebel against their good and gracious Creator. They do not obey him, they disobey, and as a result, sin comes into the world. The consequences of sin are damaging, they are destructive. It brings a curse upon the universe. We see that God issues a curse upon the serpent. He issues a curse upon the woman, and he issues a curse upon the man. This brings about things like disease, disaster, and death. Those things exist in the world because of sin. They are a result of the curse. We then come to the third major event in this first section, and that is the flood. In Genesis 6 through to 9, we see that the world was continuing to expand in its population, but people were simply doing what was right in their own eyes. They were rebelling against their good and gracious Creator, and God brings a judgment upon the world. It is a global flood. There is only one family in the mass of humanity that is spared, and that is Noah and his family. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, a family of 8. Noah builds this very large vessel, and God saves this family. Then we come to the fourth major event in this first section, and that is Babel. This is the Tower of Babel. Humanity does not do what God says. Again, a common theme since the fall. And instead of spreading across the world, spreading the fame of God's great name, they compose a tower. And in building this great big structure, it became a place of arrogance. It was something that promoted their greatness, their magnificence, and their glory. And God comes down and confuses the people's languages, forcing them to relocate to different locations around the globe. He judges the people. So the first part of the book of Genesis, Genesis 1 to 11, is primeval history. And you need to remember those four events: creation, fall, flood, and Babel. We then come to the second major section of the book of Genesis, and that's Genesis 12 to 50. And Genesis 12 to 50 can be summarized by four major names: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now, most of the attention is actually on Abraham. And there are a lot of things that take place in the lives of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph that are reiterations that were made to Abraham. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, the Lord appears to Abraham. He tells him to leave his land and go to a place of God's choosing. There he is going to give him land, he is going to give him descendants, and he is also going to bless his name. And all the earth is going to be blessed through these descendants. This promise of God is reiterated to Abraham on multiple occasions. God makes a covenant with him. And this covenant that God makes with Abraham is the solution to the fall. The covenant God makes to Abraham will bring about a reverse of the curse. So if you're going to understand Genesis 12 to 50, you need to remember the four names: Abraham, his son Isaac, then Isaac's son Jacob, and one of Jacob's sons, Joseph. As you read through the narratives, you need to see that a lot of problems begin to take place in the lives of these families and of other individuals. And you'll notice all the problems that are occurring match the problems found in Genesis 3 when God issued a curse upon humanity. These are the consequences of sin. And you are to be reading these chapters recognizing the only way for the effects of the curse to be reversed is for God's covenant to Abraham to be fulfilled. So when you read the book of Genesis, remembering it is a very big book, simply remember those themes. Genesis 1 to 11, primeval history. Genesis 12 to 50, patriarchal history. But as you read all of this, keep in mind that the solution to the problems in the world will only be solved by means of the covenant God has made to Abraham. As we continue to summarize other books of the Bible, you will see that theme continued. So happy reading as you read the book of Genesis.